Star Trek 2, yes, that's how I'm opening. Star Trek 2. Star Trek 2, Dr. McCoy walks over to Captain Kirk's house, I think maybe he's an admiral by then, and has a bottle of Romulan ale. This has bothered me since I saw the movie. I think I finally know why. If it's an ale, that means it's made with an ale strain of yeast. Ale strains of yeast don't flocculate. They float at the top of a ferment instead of sinking to the bottom like lager strains do. But that also means that they produce carbon dioxide because that's an outcome of fermentation. It also means there would have to be bubbles. The Romulan ale didn't have any bubbles. It was packaged in like a 750 ml bottle. You know, it wasn't in a 6-pack. Also, it was blue. Now, I would have thought it was a distillate, not an ale, right? They take fermentation, you put it through the still, you get a distillate. But colors, pigments don't make it through distillations. But the Romulan ale was blue. So what was in that stuff? Now that got me thinking about a lot of the other booze in science fiction because it's really problematic. I'll give you another example from Star Trek. Blood wine, Klingon blood wine, right? Well, a wine is a product of fermentation. The yeast eats sugar and basically poops out ethanol and carbon dioxide. But there's not enough sugar in blood for the yeast to have anything to eat, at least not in human blood. Now maybe Klingon blood is different, right? Maybe Klingon blood uses sugars or starches as a structural element that moves the oxygen around like we have hemoglobin. I mean, Vulcan blood is based on copper and ours is based on iron, so there could be a difference there. But maybe ethanol is not the psychoactive compound at all in these drinks, right? I mean, I'm making an assumption that it's the same kind of fermentation and distillation we do on Earth. Maybe there's something else entirely. You know, the systems in the brains of the Romulans and the Klingons could be totally different. You know, old Jank's spirit from the Hitchhiker's Guide universe actually inhibits telepathic abilities. How does that work? And all we know about butterbeer from Harry Potter is that it makes you feel warm inside, right? On Star Trek, they made that stuff in the replicators synthahol, which got you drunk but didn't get you drunk. I never really understood how that worked.
What in blazes is this?
The other universes are even more confusing, right? We know that they drink for recreation in Star Wars because they have cantinas. Right? But you never see what they order. Luke, I think, says, I'll have one of those, right? Which is a nice little elision. And I guess supposedly you could imagine that the blue milk that Aunt Beru poured was like Moloch Plus or something, but they never really say. It gets even worse in Battlestar Galactica, right? Galactica, we know that Admiral Adama had a stash of something that looked like whiskey, right? He drank it in shots and it was brown, so that means it was probably something that was clear and then aged in a barrel. And that's where the brown color would have come from. But they also had ambrosia on Caprica, which I think was green, and they said smelled a little bit like sulfur. Now, sulfur is an off product. It's an off flavor in distilling. It means you don't have enough copper in the process because the copper pulls the sulfur out. So if you have sulfur in it, that means they either made a mistake or the people on Caprica have a palate that's totally different than ours. And once they were on Galactica, they had a still, right? Chief Tyrell helped them build one. So experience from moonshine suggests that that was probably you know, whatever sugar they could get a hold of and whatever energy they could get a hold of, but it still takes heat. So where do they get the waste heat from? Maybe the engines give off heat, but we don't know how the galactic engines works. Maybe Battlestar engines are actually cold. We don't know. Plus, you would think if you were on a starship, you wouldn't want to be using yeast to do the fermentation before you distill it because the yeast gives off carbon dioxide. You would think carbon dioxide would be an enemy on a starship, right? Because you want to breathe oxygen. On the other hand, if you were also growing plants on the starship, maybe you'd want carbon dioxide because then the plants would inhale the carbon dioxide, they would give off oxygen, you'd have a closed system. It's a little simpler on planet side, I think, because then you could probably terraform and bring in your own plants that would be sugar or starches that you could convert into sugars. You probably have to bring your own yeast too. In the Star Trek universe, all of the living things are sort of based on the same DNA, so you can imagine that maybe there were yeasts on a bunch of different worlds, but you can imagine what the off flavors are like if you don't have an ale strain or a lager strain of yeast that's been bred for hundreds or thousands of years, domesticated the way we did it on Earth. Actually, I think the stuff that really interests me is the really exotic, weird stuff. In this book, The Sparrow, science fiction book I love, in The Sparrow, the bear-like aliens eat these gelatin things that get them intoxicated somehow. What's in those? I don't know. I read a fantasy novel once, a terrible one, where the wine was blue. I don't know how you get blue wine. It was blue wine. Why not? The one that I really want to know about is in Tron. You remember in Tron, they lean over into that spring thing, and they drink out of their discs, and they just talk about how good the power feels and makes their diodes glow. Science fiction, get on some details. I want to know what's in the source from Tron.